We received a story this week that stopped our entire team cold. A woman named Danielle had spent her whole life being dismissed by her own mother, overlooked, mocked, treated like a disappointment at every family gathering. But nothing compared to what happened at her mother's company BBQ. In front of dozens of colleagues, her mother made Danielle the punchline, laughing at her career, calling her job forgettable, even asking sarcastically, "So what's your call sign, sweetie?" Danielle answered calmly, "Just 2 words, night warden." And that's when everything changed. Her mother's boss, a former Navy SEAL, a man who had seen combat, who had led men through hell, went completely still. He turned to Danielle's mother. His voice dropped, and he said 5 words that silenced the entire yard. "Apologize to her. Now." The crowd froze. Her mother's face went white. Because Robert Hayes didn't just recognize that call sign. He knew exactly who Night Warden was and what she had done. Danielle sent us her story, and she asked if we could share it, not for revenge, but because she wants other daughters out there to know. Your silence doesn't mean you're weak. Sometimes it just means you're waiting for the right moment. This is her story in her own words. I didn't go to that BBQ to prove anything. I went because after 33 years of being invisible to my own mother, I finally had a chance to be seen. Not by her, but by someone she actually respects. My name is Danielle James. I'm 33 years old, and I work in a field most people will never fully understand, coordinating high-stakes operations from behind a screen, guiding teams through situations where every second matters and every wrong call could cost lives. But if you ask my mother what I do for a living, she'd probably shrug and say something like, "Oh, some desk job. Nothing special." That's the version of me she chose to believe, and for a long time, I let her. I grew up learning how to disappear. Not physically, I was always there at every dinner, every holiday, every family gathering. But emotionally, I learned early on that the easiest way to survive in my family was to take up as little space as possible. My older brother was the golden child. My younger sister was the baby who needed protecting. And me, I was the one in the middle who never caused problems, the one who figured things out on her own, the one nobody worried about because I never gave them a reason to. At first, I thought that was a compliment. I thought being low maintenance meant I was strong, independent, capable. But as I got older, I realized the truth. I wasn't being praised. I was being overlooked. And the person who overlooked me the most was my own mother. My mother is not a bad person. I want to make that clear. She's not cruel in the way villains are cruel. She doesn't yell or throw things or tell me she hates me. No. Her cruelty is quieter than that. It comes wrapped in jokes, in honest feedback, in the kind of comments that sting but are always followed by, "Oh, I'm just teasing," or "You know I only say this because I care." She cares deeply about how things look, about what the neighbors think, about whether her coworkers see her as successful, put together, admirable. And somewhere along the way, I became a stain on that image. Not because I failed, but because I didn't succeed in the way she wanted me to. I didn't marry the right kind of man. I didn't take a flashy corporate job. I didn't give her grandchildren to show off at church. I just quietly built a life she never bothered to understand. The worst part, she never asked. Not once in 33 years did my mother sit down and say, "Danielle, tell me about your work. Tell me what you do. Tell me what your life is actually like." She assumed. She filled in the blanks with her own disappointment, and then she made sure everyone around her knew that I was the daughter who never quite figured it out. I stopped correcting her years ago. What was the point? Every time I tried to explain, she'd wave her hand and change the subject. Every time I hinted that my job was more than she thought, she'd laugh it off, like I was exaggerating. Eventually, I realized that she didn't want to know the truth. The truth would mean she was wrong, and my mother hates being wrong more than anything in the world. So I became invisible. I showed up when expected. I smiled when required. I answered her jabs with short replies and changed the subject before she could dig deeper. It was easier that way. Safer. I told myself I didn't need her approval. I told myself I had made peace with who she was. But then the invitation came. It was for her company's annual summer BBQ, a big outdoor event at her boss's house full of coworkers and executives, and people she desperately wanted to impress. She invited me, the way she always did, casually, almost as an afterthought, probably expecting me to say no. And I almost did. But then I saw the name on the invitation, the host, the CEO of her company, Robert Hayes. I stared at that name for a long time, because I knew it. I had seen it before, not in a news article or a company newsletter, but on a letter that arrived at my door 7 years ago. A letter with no return address, passed through unofficial channels, containing just one line, "Night Warden, thank you. Robert Hayes." I never replied. I didn't need to. That mission was classified. What happened that night, the 36 hours I spent guiding his team out of a situation that should have killed them all, was something I had locked away and never spoken about. Not to my friends, not to my family, certainly not to my mother. But I never forgot his name. And now here it was again, on an invitation to a BBQ I had every reason to avoid. I sat with that invitation for 3 days. I thought about what it would mean to go. I thought about the risks. I thought about the possibility that Robert Hayes wouldn't even remember me. That night warden was just a call sign from a nightmare he had long since buried. But I also thought about something else. Something I had never admitted to myself before. I wasn't going to that BBQ to prove anything. I wasn't going for revenge. I was going because after 33 years of being invisible to my own mother, I finally had a chance to be seen. Not by her, but by someone she actually respected. Someone whose opinion she couldn't dismiss. Someone who might finally say the words she had refused to hear from me. So I said yes. And when I walked through the gate of Robert Hayes' backyard that evening, I made myself a quiet promise tonight one of two things would happen. Either my mother would finally hear the truth, or I would know once and for all that it was time to stop trying. The backyard was beautiful. String lights hung between oak trees, tables covered in checkered cloth, the smell of grilled meat and expensive wine filling the air. It looked like something out of a magazine, the kind of party my mother had always dreamed of being invited to. And now, here she was, not just a guest, but a featured player. I could see it in her posture the moment I arrived. She was glowing. This was her stage. I found a quiet corner near the drinks table and hoped to stay there. But my mother had other plans. Within 15 minutes, she had pulled me into a circle of her coworkers' people I had never met whose names I would forget by morning. She introduced me with that familiar tone, the one that sounds warm on the surface but carries something sharper underneath. "This is my daughter Danielle," she said, smiling wide. "She works in, well, honestly, I'm not even sure what she does. Some kind of desk job, right, sweetie?" The group chuckled politely. I smiled and said nothing, but that wasn't enough for her. It never was. She kept going, little comments here and there woven into the conversation like decorations. Danielle was always the quiet one, never really ambitious, you know. And then with a laugh, I kept telling her to go back to school, get a real career, but she likes her little routine. The people around us nodded along, not out of cruelty, but out of habit. They didn't know me. They had no reason to question her. To them, I was exactly what she described, a forgettable daughter with a forgettable life. I could have corrected her. I could have explained. But I had learned a long time ago that defending myself only made things worse. My mother didn't want answers. She wanted reactions. She wanted me to stumble, to get flustered, to give her an opening, to help me in front of everyone. So I did what I always did. I kept my voice calm. I gave short answers. I refused to play her game. And it drove her crazy. I could see it in her eyes, the frustration building every time I didn't take the bait. She laughed louder, made sharper jokes, brought up old failures I thought she had forgotten. She was pushing harder now, desperate for me to crack. But I didn't. I just stood there, steady, letting her words pass through me, like wind through an open window. What I didn't notice was the man standing a few feet away. Robert Hayes had been watching from the edge of the group, a bottle of beer untouched in his hand. I didn't recognize him at first, just another executive in a polo shirt, observing his employees. But something about the way he looked at me felt different, not dismissive, not amused, almost like he was trying to place me. A woman next to me, one of my mother's coworkers, turned and asked casually, "So, Danielle does your job, have a call sign?" I heard people who work in operations coordination sometimes use them. Before I could answer, my mother jumped in with a loud laugh. A call sign, my daughter. She put a hand on my shoulder, squeezing just a little too hard. Hers is probably coffee runner. The group laughed. She turned to me, still smirking, and said, "So, what is your call sign, sweetie? Do you even have one?" The yard felt quieter now. Or maybe that was just me. I looked at my mother. I looked at the people around her, waiting for me to fumble to confirm everything she had said. And then, I looked past them at Robert Hayes, who had stepped closer, his expression suddenly tight, focused like a man trying to remember something important. I took a breath. "Night warden," I said. My mother's smirk flickered. She didn't understand. She thought it was a joke maybe, or something I had made up to sound impressive. But Robert Hayes understood. His face went pale. His hand tightened around the bottle, and for the first time all evening, the laughter stopped. The silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't the comfortable pause between conversations or the natural lull of a party winding down. It was the kind of silence that presses against your chest, heavy and alive, as if the air itself had stopped moving. Robert Hayes set his beer down on the nearest table. His hand trembled slightly as he did it, and I noticed, because I notice everything. It's what I was trained to do. He stared at me with an intensity that made the people around us shift uncomfortably. They didn't understand what was happening. To them, Night Warden was just a strange answer to a mocking question. Maybe they thought I was being dramatic. Maybe they thought I had made it up to sound impressive. But Robert knew. I could see it in his eyes, the recognition, the memories flooding back, the weight of a night he had probably tried very hard to forget. I knew what he was remembering. I had lived it too, from the other side of a radio signal thousands of miles away, in a windowless room filled with screens and static. His team had been trapped behind enemy lines. Communications had failed. Their extraction had been compromised, and for 36 hours they had no way out and no one coming to save them. Except me. I was the voice, on the other end of the radio, the one who stayed awake, stayed calm, stayed connected when everything else fell apart. I didn't know their faces. I didn't know their names. I only knew their call signs and the sound of their breathing when they were too exhausted to speak. I guided them through the darkness, one instruction at a time, until they finally reached safety. 7 of them walked out alive that night. Robert Hayes was one of them, and now he was standing in his own backyard watching my mother laugh at me. He stepped forward, not fast, not aggressive, just deliberate. The crowd parted slightly without realizing they were doing it. My mother was still smiling, though the smile had started to falter. She didn't understand why everyone had gone quiet. She looked at Robert, then at me, then back at Robert, waiting for someone to explain the joke she had clearly missed. "Apologize." Robert's voice was low, controlled, but it cut through the silence like a blade. "Now." My mother blinked. "I'm sorry. You heard me." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every single person in that yard was listening. "Apologize to your daughter. Right now." She let out a nervous laugh, the kind people use when they're trying to defuse a situation they don't understand. "Robert, I don't know what she told you, but she didn't tell me anything." He took another step closer, and I saw my mother physically lean back. "I'm not speaking to you as your boss. I'm speaking to you as a man whose life your daughter saved, along with 6 others, on a night you never wanted to know about." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You've spent this entire evening mocking her, making her the punchline, and she stood there and took it because that's who she is. But I'm not going to stand here and let you do it for one more second." The yard was completely still. No one moved. No one whispered. I could hear the faint sound of music playing from a speaker somewhere, but it felt miles away. My mother's face had gone white. She opened her mouth, closed. It opened it again. For the first time in my life, I watched her search for words and find nothing. And here's the strangest part, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel satisfied or vindicated or any of the things I thought I might feel if this moment ever came. I just stood there, calm, watching it unfold like it was happening to someone else. Maybe because I had already made peace with who my mother was. Maybe because I knew that no apology she gave tonight would be real. The people around us had started to shift their attention. They weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at her, at the woman who had been performing all evening, who had commanded the crowd with her jokes and her confidence. Now she looked small, exposed, and I think she knew it. I'm sorry, she finally said. The words came out thin, almost a whisper. She didn't look at me when she said them. She looked at the ground, but I saw her eyes, and what I found there wasn't regret. It wasn't shame or guilt or any of the things a real apology carries. It was fear. An old buried fear, the kind that has been hiding for years, waiting to be uncovered. I didn't understand it then, but I was about to. The crowd began to drift apart after that. People found excuses to refill their drinks, check their phones, start conversations on the other side of the yard. No one wanted to stand too close to the wreckage. My mother had disappeared somewhere, and I didn't go looking for her. I needed a moment to breathe. I walked toward the edge of the property, where the string lights gave way to the quiet darkness of the garden. The noise of the party felt distant now, like something happening in another world. I stood there for a few minutes, letting the night air cool my skin, trying to process what had just happened. That's when Robert found me. He approached slowly, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, "You knew I'd be here tonight, didn't you?" I didn't see any point in lying. "Yes." He nodded as if he had expected that answer. "How long have you known I was running your mother's company?" "A few years," I admitted. "I've kept track of her career from a distance. When I saw your name listed as CEO, I recognized it immediately." I paused. "The letter you sent me 7 years ago, I never forgot it." Robert studied my face, searching for something. "So tonight wasn't an accident. You came here on purpose." "I came here because I knew my mother would never listen to me. She spent my whole life deciding who I am without ever asking." "But you—" I met his eyes. "You she respects. You she would believe." He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "You waited 7 years for this?" I shook my head. "I waited 33 years. 7 years ago, I just finally had proof that I wasn't what she said I was. But proof doesn't matter if the person you're showing it to refuses to look." Robert exhaled slowly, like a man setting down a weight he had been carrying. He looked out at the darkness beyond the garden, then back at me. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead." "Does your family have anyone who served military, I mean?" The question caught me off guard. I hesitated before answering. "My mother had a brother, David. He died before I was born." I frowned, trying to remember the little I had been told. She never talked about him much, just said it was an accident. Robert's expression shifted. Something flickered behind his eyes, not surprise exactly, but confirmation, like he had suspected something and just had it verified. "It wasn't an accident," he said. I felt my stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" "After what happened tonight, I made a few calls. Old contacts. People who can access military records." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "David was killed in 1991. Desert Storm. He was part of a reconnaissance unit. They were ambushed during an intelligence gathering mission. He didn't make it out." The world seemed to tilt slightly. I reached for the fence beside me, steadying myself. My uncle, the one my mother barely mentioned, the one whose photographs were buried in boxes I was never allowed to open, had died in combat. Not in some vague accident, in a war, doing something not so different from what I do now. And my mother had never told me. Everything began to rearrange itself in my mind. Her resistance when I first told her about my career, the way she dismissed every accomplishment, every promotion, every mission I hinted at, the jokes that weren't really jokes, the refusal to acknowledge that my work mattered. She wasn't just disappointed in me. She was terrified that she would lose me the same way she lost her brother. And instead of telling me the truth, instead of sharing that fear and letting me understand, she buried it. She convinced herself that if she pretended my work didn't matter, then maybe it wouldn't be real. Maybe I would be safe. But burying fear doesn't make it go away. It just makes it grow in the dark. I found her sitting alone on a bench near the back of the house, away from the remaining guests. Her eyes were red, Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. I sat down beside her. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just asked quietly, "When did Uncle David really die, and how?" Her whole body stiffened. She turned to look at me, and I saw something I had never seen before, raw, unguarded panic. You know, I just found out," I said, "tonight." She didn't respond. Her hands were shaking now, trembling in her lap like leaves in a storm. "I understand," I continued. "I understand why you were scared, why you didn't want me doing what I do, why it was easier to pretend it didn't matter than to admit you were afraid of losing me." She still said nothing. Tears were streaming down her face, silent and steady. "But, Mom..." I took a breath, and when I spoke again, my voice was tired. Not angry, just exhausted. "Do you know what hurts more than losing someone, having them right beside you for 33 years and never once truly seeing them? Never once asking who they really are?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in my entire life, my mother had nothing to say. No jokes, no deflections, no corrections, just silence. I stood up. I had said what I needed to say. There was nothing left. But as I turned to walk away, I felt her hand grab my arm. Her grip was weak, desperate. She looked up at me with wet eyes and whispered, "Please don't tell anyone about tonight. Please, I can't have people knowing." I stared at her, and in that moment, something inside me finally broke, not with sadness, but with clarity. She wasn't sorry for what she had done to me. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking me to protect her image, to keep her secret, to make sure no one knew that the woman who had spent the evening mocking her daughter had been publicly humiliated in return. Even now, after everything, she was still more afraid of losing face than losing me. I left the BBQ that night without saying goodbye. There was nothing left to say. I drove home in silence. No music, no phone calls, just the hum of the road and the quiet reckoning happening inside my chest. I had spent 33 years waiting for my mother to see me, and now that she finally had, I realized something I hadn't expected. It didn't change anything. Not really. She saw me, and she still chose her image over me. That truth should have broken me. But instead, it set me free. The days that followed were strange. I went back to work. I kept my routines. I didn't call my mother, and she didn't call me, at least not at first. But I heard things. Through distant relatives, through a cousin who worked near my mother's office, through the quiet network of whispers that families can never quite escape. Robert Hayes, true to his character, didn't treat my mother any differently at work. He was professional, courteous. He didn't punish her or demote her or make her life difficult. That wasn't who he was. He had said what needed to be said that night, and as far as he was concerned, the matter was closed. But the colleagues who had witnessed that evening, they were a different story. They stopped laughing at her jokes. Not dramatically, not obviously, but enough that she noticed. The lunch invitations dried up. The casual conversations by the coffee machine became shorter, more polite, more distant. No one confronted her. No one said anything directly. But the warmth she had worked so hard to cultivate, the social currency she had spent years accumulating, evaporated almost overnight. She wasn't fired. She wasn't demoted. On paper, nothing changed. But the stage she had built for herself, the one where she was always the center of attention, always the one with the clever comment and the approving audience, that stage was empty now. And for a woman like my mother, that was a punishment far worse than any formal consequence could ever be. I heard she started eating lunch alone. I heard she stopped volunteering for team events. I heard she came in early and left late, avoiding the social hours she used to dominate. Part of me felt a flicker of something, not satisfaction exactly, but recognition. She was finally experiencing what I had felt my entire life, the loneliness of being invisible. About a week after the BBQ, she called me. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up, maybe curiosity, maybe the last stubborn thread of hope that daughters can never quite cut, no matter how many times they've been burned. "Danielle," she said. Her voice sounded tired, older. "I want to explain about David, about everything. Can we meet?" I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "You can explain now. I'm listening." She hesitated. I think she had expected me to agree to meet to give her a stage again, an audience of one, where she could control the narrative. But I wasn't going to give her that. Not anymore. "I was 19 when David died," she finally said. "He was my little brother. He was so proud to serve. And then one day he was just gone. No warning, no goodbye. Just a phone call and a flag and a hole in the ground." Her voice cracked. "I swore I would never let anyone I loved go through that again. And when you chose that path, when you told me what you wanted to do with your life, I couldn't handle it. I thought if I pretended it wasn't real, if I made it small, then maybe—" She trailed off. I waited. "Maybe you would quit," she finished. "Maybe you would choose something safe." I closed my eyes. I understood. I really did. The fear of losing someone you love can make you do terrible things. It can make you push them away, just to avoid the pain of watching them leave. But understanding isn't the same as forgiving. "Mom," I said, and my voice was calm, steady. The same voice I used on missions, when everything was falling apart and someone needed to stay grounded. "I'm not angry about Uncle David. I wish you had told me, but I understand why you didn't." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. "What I can't understand is this: you had 33 years to tell me the truth. 33 years to explain your fear, to let me in, to let me help you carry it. And instead, you chose silence. You chose to turn me into your enemy, to make me the problem, because that was easier than facing what you were really afraid of." I took a breath. "I could have understood your fear, Mom, but I can't understand why you made me pay for it." She was crying. I could hear it through the phone, the muffled sobs, the shaky breathing, but I didn't comfort her. I had spent my whole life comforting her, shrinking myself to make her feel better. I was done. "I've accepted a new assignment," I told her. "Long-term, far away. I don't know when I'll be back." "Danielle, please." "I'm not running," I said. "I'm just finally done waiting for you to see me. I see myself now. That's enough." I hung up before she could respond. A few days before I left, I went through my closet and found a small box I had kept buried in the back for 7 years. Inside was a medal, the one I had been awarded after the night warden mission, the one I had refused to accept at the official ceremony. They had mailed it to me anyway, and I had never opened it. I didn't want it. Not because I wasn't proud of what I had done, but because there was no one in my life who would understand what it meant. I opened the box now and looked at it for the first time. It was smaller than I expected, heavier. I wrote a note, folded it carefully, and placed it inside the box with the medal. Then I mailed it to my mother's house. The note said, "I didn't accept this because I thought you didn't want to know. Now you know. I want you to keep it so you remember that your daughter was never a failure. You just never asked." I don't know what she did when she opened it. I wasn't there. I was already gone, not to escape, but to finally start living without the weight of her expectations dragging me down. I imagined she sat alone in her living room, the medal in her hands, reading that note over and over. I imagined she looked around at the empty house, the silent phone, the calendar, with no plans and no visitors. I imagined she realized for the first time in her life that there was no one left to blame for where she was. No one except herself. And me. I didn't leave angry. I didn't leave bitter. I left free. For 33 years, I had been waiting for my mother to give me permission to be proud of who I am. That night at the BBQ, I finally realized I didn't need it. I never had. My mother lost a lot that summer. She lost her social standing. She lost her carefully constructed image. She lost the daughter who had always come back no matter how many times she was pushed away. But I didn't lose anything. I found something instead. I found the quiet, unshakable knowledge that I am exactly who I was meant to be with or without her approval. And that is something she can never take away from me. That was Danielle's story. And if you've stayed with us until now, I want to take a moment to talk about what this story really means, not just for Danielle, but for anyone who has ever felt unseen by the people who were supposed to love them the most. Danielle didn't go to that BBQ looking for revenge. She didn't walk into her mother's world hoping to humiliate her or tear her down. She went because after 33 years of being dismissed, mocked, and made invisible, she wanted one thing to be seen. Not by strangers, not by colleagues, but by the one person whose opinion had shaped her entire life, her mother. And here's the painful truth that Danielle discovered that night. Sometimes the people we want validation from the most are the people least capable of giving it. Not because they don't love us, but because their own wounds have made them blind. Danielle's mother wasn't a monster. She was a broken woman who lost her brother to war and spent the rest of her life terrified of losing her daughter the same way. But instead of facing that fear, instead of being honest about it, she buried it. She turned her terror into criticism. She transformed her love into control. And in doing so, she pushed away the very person she was trying to protect. That's the tragedy of this story. Danielle's mother loved her daughter. She just loved her in the worst possible way, a way that felt like rejection, like disappointment, like never being good enough. And by the time she realized what she had done, it was too late. The damage was done. The distance was set. And Danielle had finally learned to stop waiting for an apology that would never truly come. But here's what I want you to take away from this story, and I mean this sincerely. Danielle's mother paid a price. She lost her social standing. She lost the respect of her colleagues. She lost her daughter not to death, not to war, but to something far more permanent, the quiet decision of a child who finally stopped trying. That is a loss she will carry for the rest of her life. And it didn't come from punishment. It came from consequence. There's a difference. Punishment is something we impose on others. Consequence is something that grows naturally from the choices we make. Danielle didn't punish her mother. She simply stopped protecting her from the consequences of her own behavior. She stopped shrinking herself to make her mother comfortable. She stopped swallowing her pain to keep the peace. And when she did, the truth came out not through anger, not through confrontation, but through the simple act of finally being honest. That's the real power in this story. Danielle didn't need to yell. She didn't need to fight. She just needed to stand still and let the truth speak for itself. And when she did, everything changed. Now I want to speak directly to those of you who saw yourself in Danielle. Maybe you have a parent who never understood you. Maybe you have a family member who makes you feel small every time you're around them. Maybe you've spent years trying to prove yourself to someone who refuses to see your worth. If that's you, I want you to hear this. You are not responsible for making other people understand you. You are not required to keep explaining yourself to people who have already decided who you are. Your job is not to convince them. Your job is to live your truth and let them decide whether they want to be part of it. Danielle spent 33 years waiting for her mother's approval. And in the end, she realized she never needed it. She was already worthy. She was already enough. The only thing that changed was that she finally believed it. And here's the lesson I hope stays with you. Long after this video ends, the people who truly love you will ask. They will be curious about your life. They will want to know your struggles, your victories, your dreams. They won't assume. They won't dismiss. They won't fill in the blanks with their own disappointments. Real love asks questions. Real love listens to the answers. And if someone in your life has never once asked who you really are, that tells you everything you need to know, not about your worth, but about their limitations. Danielle's mother never asked. And because of that, she missed out on knowing one of the bravest, most resilient, most extraordinary people she would ever meet, her own daughter. That's not Danielle's loss. That's her mother's. And she will have to live with that for the rest of her life. So if you're watching this and you have children or siblings or friends or anyone in your life who you think you know, ask them. Ask them about their work. Ask them about their passions. Ask them about the parts of themselves they've stopped sharing because they assumed you didn't care. You might be surprised by what you learn, and you might save yourself from the kind of regret that Danielle's mother will never escape. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt invisible to someone who should have seen you? Have you ever had a moment where the truth finally came out and everything changed? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one, and I know there are people in this community who need to hear that they're not alone. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you of your own journey, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel. We share stories like this every week. Stories about resilience, about truth, about the quiet power of finally being seen. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join this community of people who believe that every story matters. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and thank you for being here. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.